Committee. Welcome to the Rancho Unified School District Special Meeting of the Board of Education, meeting of May 26, 2016. We will start with item number 1, call to order. Roll call, Dr. Aurora Villon, present. Mr. Jose Lara.
Present.
Dr. Teresa Medina.
Present.
Ms. Rachel Canchola.
Here.
Mr. Gabriel Orozco will be absent due to back to school night at his place of employment. Move on to 1B, roll call members of the Administrative Cabinet, Mr. Martin Galindo.
Here.
Dr. Roxanne Fuentes.
Here.
Mr. Ruben Frutos.
Here.
Mr. Mark Matthews.
Here.
Ms. Catherine Aguirre.
Here.
We'll move to item 2. If you can all please stand up and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Moving on to item number 3, do I have a motion to approve the agenda of the May 26, 2016 meeting?
So moved.
Let's take a vote. Ms. Canchola?
Yes.
Dr. Medina?
Yes.
Mr. Lara?
Yes.
Leon, yes. 4-0 to approve the agenda as presented. Public comments. We don't have any pop cards. We don't have any public comments. So at this point, we'll move right on to our study session at item number 5A, parliamentary procedures for effective board meetings.
All right. Good afternoon, board members, staff, public, everyone. I'm Sal Odin. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. I have with me my colleague, Melissa Gallegos. She's a relatively new attorney to our law firm. She recently graduated from Loyola Law School. She's been working for us for about 2 years already. And she's actually helping update my materials that I've done for this before. She's assisting a DLAC with another district with similar parliamentary procedure type of issues. So I've invited her to come in and just to observe my presentation today on this subject. By way of background, Mr. Galindo called and said, you know, can you come out and help review parliamentary procedures and Robert's Rules of Order and that sort of stuff with our board so that we can work towards having a more consistent approach to our meetings, being more efficient, and those types of things. I said, sure, not a problem. And so as part of putting together our presentation, we went through and looked through your board bylaws, and guess what? Your board bylaws don't require you to follow Robert's Rules of Order. It's not been adopted as such, and so Robert's Rules kind of will serve as a guideline for our discussion today, but I want us to all understand we are not subject to the specific requirements of Robert's Rules of Order. I'm assuming that some of us know what Robert's Rules of Order is and that sort of stuff, so let me just take a few steps back and by way of this introduction explain what this presentation is really on is parliamentary procedures and what are parliamentary procedures and what do they mean. And so they're just procedures for boards or organizations on how to run their meeting, how to carry their meetings. And sometimes you have structured boards with a specific number of people. Other times you may have a committee or sometimes a massive assembly, 300,000-400,000 thousands of people that are participating. And parliamentary procedures is a way for allowing groups of any variety of sizes to agree on what are the protocols for everyone to have an opportunity to participate. And in some ways, for us being a public agency, not only do we need help in running our meetings, but the law, the statute, the Brown Act tells us there's a few other things you need to do as far as how you run your meetings and how you call your meetings. So interwoven into today's presentation, I'll also be discussing a little bit about the Brown Act. I'm not here to do a full Brown Act presentation, but it will cross over. And so why is it important to have parliamentary procedures? And it's important because what you want is you want to have our decision-making body, our board, to have a full and fair opportunity to discuss items within the rules that you've chosen to be governed by. And one of the things that I've noticed in your bylaws is there's a commitment that's already been made by this board to end all of your meetings by 9:30 p.m. And so I don't know how often your board meetings go beyond 9:30 p.m., but it's not unusual for governing bodies to want to set a time to be able to get their business done. And so in some of the other districts where they have those time constraints, about 30 minutes before that time constraint hits, there's a board member who will make a motion that, do we extend time or do we not extend time, and for how much? And under your rules, you can extend your time just once. And so you need to be very judicious about that. And so with that in mind, knowing that we could probably start as early as we want, as long as we don't end by 9:30, you can start your meeting at 4 o'clock so that you're not done at 9:30. But if most of your meetings start at 5, then you've given yourself 4.5 hours to do the board's business. And in terms of doing the board's business, parliamentary procedures will help you do it in a way that's efficient and effective, that will allow for a full and fair discussion of all those items.
So you said full and fair discussion?
Full and fair discussion.
Okay.
Right. So as we look at parliamentary procedures will recognize that there may be different participants who attend at a meeting. In your case, the different participants are yourselves, the governing body, your staff who's here to assist and support you, and of course the members of the public. And so each of those groups or segments may have a role in your meeting. And so part of their role is to ensure that they too are treated fairly in terms of their role in this process. I think the biggest point that I want to make sure that the board understands is any type of parliamentary procedure that you have in place that you want to use it to make your meetings more effective. Don't use it as a way to unfairly preclude people from participating, to take advantage of the technical rules to delay acting. Parliamentary procedures is really to give everyone a chance to speak your mind. You had your fair shot, and let's move on. Let's decide yes or no on a subject and move forward. So with that introduction, or that bit of introduction, I want to share with you all a little bit about what we're going to expect today. Again, when I do this presentation with some boards, they have adopted Robert's Rules of Order. Here, we have not adopted Robert's Rules of Order. When we do, when a body does not adopt Robert's Rules of Order, then what parliamentary procedures do you follow, right? So what do you follow? And the way the bylaws here have set it out, they've said, your president is charged with the responsibility of making sure that the meetings are conducted in some orderly type of fashion. That leaves a lot of discretion to your board president. What has become true, if you will, is every body will adopt their own style for running their meetings. In some districts where I go, I often hear, is there a motion? Someone says, motion, second, call the question, then you vote. Other times, the board president, is there a motion? There's a motion. Is there a second? And it's very procedural, where there's a calling, right? Your board president or your chair will call. Is there a motion? And doesn't move on until she hears, so moved. Board president, is there a second? I second. And it's very progressive. But in other places, there's a fast pace. There's a culture that you develop, and you go into, I move, second, okay? Discussion is the only question that's asked by the board president, right? Hearing none, call the question. Those in favor? Anyone opposed? Abstentions? I always worry when board meetings kind of run that quickly, because are you potentially cutting off someone from wanting to discuss? It's just a board president, and it will depend on the style of that board president. After there's a motion and second, you get some more formality. It's been moved and seconded that we approve this new contract, right? Is there any discussion? That's more formal. You're asking as the board president, you're guiding your board. Is there any more discussion or any discussion on this? Hearing none, I call the question. Those in favor, right? And so your procedures can move more formally, okay? Yes?
Do you want us to ask questions as you go along?
Sure, you know what, I'm here to provide you some assistance. We're gonna go through a number of things. I'm gonna cover motions, I'm gonna cover how to adjust motions. What I'm really gonna try to do is simplify it. One of the things, and I'll admit, Robert's Rules is intimidating. It's intimidating for me.
But we don't use that.
But yeah, you're not required to use it here. I think it's a good guideline to use, but you get wrapped up in all of the in all of the complications of it.
It's a way to hide behind the rules.
Sometimes, but the other thing that's important about Robert's Rules is Robert's Rules understands you can suspend yourself. You can suspend Robert's Rules, right? If it gets too complicated, too confusing, someone can make a motion, point of privilege. I move that we suspend Robert's Rules of Order. And then if it's seconded, you vote on that and it's suspended, and let's figure out what's going on, okay? And I can share with you that I've been in the middle of meetings where there's a very complicated issue, and you hear some people saying, well, I want this on that, how about this? And there isn't an orderly discussion because it's very organic. And then sometimes I have to, work with those boards and say, okay, there's two parts here. You're trying to figure out when you do this, on what date and what time, okay? But you haven't decided, do you even want to do it? How about we break it down? First decide, do you want to do this? Let's take a vote. Yes, okay, now let's move on to the rest of the discussion. And it would get too complicated if you're trying to use Robert's Rules. So in a case like that, I can see how we would suspend that. Yes.
We spent some time on a Saturday, sometime back, probably about a year ago, where we actually did come up with board meetings, norms and protocols, and they were approved by the board. So is that something that we need to include in the bylaws? I don't want Mr. Galindo share those with you.
You know what, I wasn't aware that there were separate norms, but if you do have norms, that's something that exists within your bylaws for, I guess, your own personal conduct. I wasn't here, I didn't come prepared to discuss norms as far as how do we engage with each other, sort of like with respect, allow everyone to speak once at a time, listen with the intent of understanding. To me, those are norms.
Because those are the ones that have been guiding our meetings.
Okay.
We agree and we voted on it, and we're pretty much have tried to abide by that because all of us agreed to it. So,
Okay.
Point of order. That's not entirely accurate because I believe it was before the two new board members came on that Dr. Bjorn is talking about what we agreed to. And then subsequently through the rest of the meetings, it would seem like it was used just to target one board member, to prevent that board member from speaking. And so when it came back around and there was an attempt to get it passed again with the new board in January of this year, it didn't come forward. And then at the last board meeting, we did not have a quorum. We did not have all 5 board members. We had a unanimous. We have 4 people there. So one of the questions was, can you vote on something and when not all 4 are there, is it required a unanimous vote? Or is it through 2/3 of the board members there? According to what I read, it's a unanimous. But if you're not using, if our board policies aren't updated and we're not going to be using CSBA's recommendation who has updated policies, then what do you use?
Okay.
If we cite 9323.2 of our board bylaws, even though it hasn't been updated, do we still cite the 9323.2 of what is a current version from CSBA?
Okay. Wow, there's a lot, and there's a lot of valid points and issues, and so, I do plan on answering questions about 2/3. That's a big question for a lot of boards, not just you. I don't have the answers to your question about norms and whether it was adopted in this last January or not, the prior board or not. The reality is this, prior board or not, if it's been approved and authorized, it will continue to move forward until a board decides to change that. When you have a board bylaw, a board policy that may have been adopted in the year 1997 and it has not been changed, modified, amended, that's what you have in place. And that will remain in place so long as it is not illegal, right? You can't have a rule in place that's illegal. So just to use a very far-fetched example, if at some point in time we might have had rules that allowed students to smoke, right, by the gym, well, that's outlawed now. There are laws that prohibit tobacco on school sites, but I would imagine at some point there may have been a board policy that says kids in high school can smoke as long as they're smoking by the boys' room or the gym room. Well, we couldn't enforce that. What we can enforce is current bylaws or current policies that are not illegal. And so if there's a need to revisit your bylaws, if there's a need for you to update them, then bring that forward as part of your regular board meeting for discussion and approval. Let's move forward. I'm going to try to make sure, Rachel, that I answer your questions, or Ms. Control, I answer your questions through the procedures that we're going to follow. Today, what I want to make sure the objective is that you understand your forum. You understand how you work and how the different moving parts work with your public, with your staff, and the role of parliamentary procedures. I want to review some basic terminology, and I do want to make sure that we address these issues about what constitutes board action and what is a majority and when do you need something other than that, because you actually have an exhibit to one of your board bylaws that tells you when you need more than just a simple majority, and so we can go over that. Mr. Lada, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. Do you have a copy of the board bylaws? I mean, updated one? Or like you're talking about the ones that are online?
Online. I'm talking about the ones that are online. So if there's something more recent than what you have online, I don't have that. Let's see. All right. And then, again, this presentation, it usually runs a little over an hour, depending on how much engagement I get from boards. But we're scheduled to be here for about an hour and a half. I want to honor your time and not have you here any longer. There will be opportunities at the end for Q&A, but in between, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. So, understanding our forum, understanding what it is that we do, I want to remind you here, El Rancho Unified School District Board Bylaws 9000. That series is what controls you as a board. These are the rules you've agreed to adhere to for conducting your work, your business, and particularly those sections that apply to your board meetings. So what is the work that the board shall do? You shall work with your superintendent to fulfill the major responsibilities. We went through your board bylaws and picked out these top 5 that are on there. So you're here to set direction, you're here to establish effective and efficient organizational structures, you're here to provide support to the superintendent and staff to carry out your direction. And so I ask that you consider these points when you think about your role at your board meetings. You should be driven by these points. If you had a compass, and maybe this is the Boy Scout in me, right? If you had a compass, these are your true norths, right? These are the things that guide your decisions, and your actions should be driven by one of these points. Once you understand that, we can move into our board meetings. And moving into our board meetings, we need to understand there are laws and rules that impact our forum and how we meet. In order for you to exercise your authority as a board, we know that the Education Code Section 35-164 tells you the board shall act by a majority of vote of all members constituting the board unless otherwise required by law. So, simply put, we are a board comprised of 5 members. A majority of us are 3. Unless otherwise required by law, you do not need more than 3. Right? So moving forward, anytime you have 3 votes, for those cases when a higher level required vote is necessary. Do we have any questions there on the majority, what majority means?
No, but which are the pieces that will require more than?
If you give me a second here.
And also, while you're looking for that, can we get you're not citing the exact board bylaw or the board policy. Here you have here you have it written down that earlier on again. So if we come up to an item that doesn't have a board policy, we can refer us to it so we can access it to what I have here in print.
Mr. Lara, your question was, is there a list of actions requiring more than a majority vote? The specific citation is exhibit, it's noticed as E 9323.2, pages A, B, and C. And what I can do is when the session's over, I'll have Ms. Watkins make copies, and that way the board can have these readily available. But it spells out actions requiring 2/3 vote of the board.
And that would be 4. 2/3 of the board would be 4, or are you talking about?
Correct.
Majority, okay, so we're talking about 4.
Right, so these are the exceptions to 3,
Okay.
right? When do you need more than 3? So 2/3 vote is 4 out of 5 of the board. And keep that in mind, of the board. You might have a board meeting where there are only 3 board members present. That would establish a quorum. Could you get 2/3 of the board to vote there?
No.
No, because you need 4. You could
On
have,
those items.
yeah, on these,
On those
correct,
items.
So
right.
no, on any item.
No.
If you have 3 board members, you can vote, get it, something passed with 2 of the 3 votes.
No, you cannot.
That's what, on any item.
No. Okay,
I got confused when someone said something about 3
okay,
votes.
so let's back up.
Okay.
Okay. A majority vote of all members constituting the board, the second bullet point there, right? How many board members do we have on the board? 5. A majority of 5 will always be 3. So for any action, you must always have 3 votes. If you have only 3 members present and 2 vote in favor and 1 votes opposed, do you have a majority? No. Okay? If you have 4 board members present and 2 in favor, 2 opposed? No. Okay? And so,
If you have 4 members and 3 votes to 1,
and if 3 to 1, that's a majority.
right?
Of those present.
No. Always the number is 3. Any combination of 3 at any time is a majority of the board. Okay?
Okay. All right, I'll have to check on that, because I believe, well, you're gonna tell us the exceptions.
Right, when you
Okay.
need more than 3.
Right.
So the exceptions when you need more than 3 are found at Board Bylaw 9323.2 and the exhibit to that, okay? So it's for, and consider it, it's for real serious action, right? Where it's a major decision. It's going to change something in the district. So the first example is declaring the intention to sell or lease real property. Well, that's a big deal, right? You know, and I don't mean to minimize prom, but what if you wanted to change the date of prom? It's not as big a deal as selling property or leasing property. And that's why a 2/3 vote would be required for these types of things. So another example, declaring the board's intent to convey or dedicate property, a resolution authorizing or directing the board president to execute a deed of dedication or conveyance of property, leasing of board property for 3 months or more. So I can run down this whole list and you're gonna see that these are some major issues. Your list also goes on where it calls for a supermajority, actions requiring 4/5, right? I'm sorry, actions requiring 2/3 vote of board members present at a meeting. So you actually have rules here when you have less than 5 board members, right? So this could be 4. 2/3 of those board members to determine that there's a need to take immediate action for adding an item to the agenda, and that's consistent with the Brown Act, or to determine that you need to take an action into closed session during an emergency meeting. So that's where that exception comes in. And then you have another listing requiring 4/5 of a vote when there's a need to expend or transfer funds or use district property or personnel to meet a national or local emergency.
So let's go back real quick. Adding an item onto the agenda requires 4 votes. Correct?
2/3 votes of those members present.
Okay. Which would be 3. If you're talking about present, you're talking about 2/3 of those present. I think that it actually says, my understanding of reading the board policy is that it's the 2/3 of the membership, which would be 4. Because then we start going into supermajority and.
Okay, the problem is this, Ms. Conchola. When your rule says of those members present, I can't tell you if there are 3 board members present at that meeting, 4 board members present, or 5 board members present. But if it doesn't say members present, meaning in attendance, then it has to be 2/3 of your body, 2/3 out of 5. It will almost require 4 votes all the time for a 2/3 vote. I don't know if that's an easier way to.
Well, that's how I understood it.
Okay.
Then when you were talking about it, something different.
I don't know if that's clear. I don't think that's clear, so I'm just letting you know, so
Okay.
you can identify, because that's a critical point for this board, and understanding what 2/3 of something is, because you said it a couple different ways, because my estimation, when you have 2/3 of 4 people, that's 3.
Right, but. that-
Depending on the item.
Well, depending on the item. If it's an item when it only requires 2/3 of those present, then you're right, 3 out of 4 would make sense.
Correct.
But when it says 2/3 of the board, it says nothing about being present. It's 2/3 of 5.
Right.
And so that's, as long as you read where your authority is it of the board or is it of those present?
Okay, so if I can take you to 93.2A on this page, number 1, it says a board by majority vote of its members, that would be of all 5 members, so it requires 4 votes for that. It doesn't say anything about present.
Okay, so maybe we should back this up this way. A majority is 50% plus 1,
Okay.
right? So it's half of 5 is 2.5. Well, you get the 1 once you get 3. So typically, 3 out of 5 is considered a majority.
Right.
So for all actions, you need at least 3. You can never have less than 3. Are we all in agreement?
Yes,
Majority is 3 or more,
yes,
okay? So you must always have 3,
yes.
okay? Then for special circumstances, you may need more than 3. And those situations are listed out in your exhibit. I don't want to spend too much time on this anymore. So we will provide you a copy of this. If towards the end we have time to come back and we revisit this, we can come back and revisit it. But as long as you all understand, in order to take any action, you need a minimum of 3 votes,
Right.
then you're fine. Now, what will happen is if one of these items were to come up that requires a supermajority, more than a simple, a super, then you will have guidance from your superintendent telling the board, for this item, we need 2/3 vote in favor. And that's what you should expect. And whoever the board president is at the time that you do agenda review, be sensitive to these types of issues when an item requires a 2/3 vote or some other type of supermajority vote. Sandy, I know you can get access to these, but I'll leave that copy there if you want to make those today.
So just let me just make sure. So unless expressly stipulated in those 2 sections or 3 sections you just identified,
Yes.
it's always 3 votes, period.
Right.
Okay.
Whether you have 3 board members present, 4, or all 5. You must always have 3 to have a majority to move it forward. And 2 were in favor, 1 was opposed, and they moved the item forward as approved, and that's a big no-no. They had to go back and redo it. Okay? So it always has to be 3. Now, if we were a board of 7, right, we would need 4. So, all right. So keeping in mind some of the points here, right? An individual board member has no individual authority. So this board could not act on the independent decision of one board member, okay? Even as your board president, they function independently within parliamentary procedures to make decisions about, when do we convene, when do we recess, you're making that board president responsible for deciding rules or ruling on parliamentary procedural issues. Board sometimes will appoint a parliamentarian, someone who is responsible for familiarizing themselves with rules of parliamentary procedures to assist with things like, is this a 2/3 vote or not? Which motion shall carry first or not? But otherwise, there's no individual board member who has any individual authority. Okay? Within our own board bylaws, it says the president shall conduct board meetings in accordance with the board bylaws and procedures that enable board members to efficiently consider issues and carry out the will of the majority. So we've already said a majority means 3 board members. Okay? The board president's job is to carry the will of that majority. And there may be times when a board president is not in favor of a certain item or action, and that's where their true professionalism, their true leadership must come forward to do the will of the majority. That's what they've been charged to do. And this is where I added the special note again to mention Robert's Rules of Order have not been adopted into your board bylaws. So it's easy for people to say, oh, that Robert's Rule doesn't, well, it doesn't apply to us here. So we can go ahead and maybe refer to it for some guidance, but we're not obligated to follow it. Dr. Levine?
Well, that was my question, so we cannot, at the board meeting, say, well, we're in violation of Robert's Rules of Order, because we're not,
No.
The statement,
I'm sorry, because we're not allowing fire.
Correct. Correct.
so the statement would be, we're in violation of our board bylaws, 9323 or 91,
Well,
because then that would be a correct statement.
not necessarily. And here's why. Because we don't have any written rules of parliamentary procedures. So without any specific rule, the only guiding principle is, has the board president acted in a way, right, where she's conducting a meeting to ensure that every member was efficiently provided an opportunity to consider the issue, right? And that's it, you know, this is Robert's Rules for you, this one statement, that's it. That's all you have to guide yourself on.
So who determines that? Who determines if the president is conducting the board meetings in accordance to enable the board to efficiently consider issues and carry out the will of the majority? The will of the majority, correct?
Right, the will of the majority. So, if, for example, let's say the chair or the board president got so mad and started cursing and using obscenities in the middle of the meeting, one of the board members could make a motion. I move to declare the board president out of order and violating our principle of enabling the board members to efficiently consider issues and carry out the will of the majority. The board president then has to call for a second. If there is a second, there has to be discussion. And someone will call the question, and then they will vote on that at that point in time. But otherwise, you know, most cases, for efficiency's sake, your meetings do move without that level of contention.
So would that be the case if an individual board member is being disruptive or
Asking questions?
what's it called, being interrupting, or what's it called, being rude or not following the quorum of the meeting? Could that question be called on an individual board member as well? Not giving up their speaking time, etc.?
Those would be types of issues that your chair would follow. So, for example, if under these rules, your chair, if there's someone, and it doesn't have to be just a board member, it could be a member of staff, it could be a member of the public, the chair may gavel that person and say, excuse me, you are out of order, you need to wait until you are recognized by the chair. And so there are formalities, you know, who has the floor, right? And you need, if someone's out of order, you must yield to Mr. Lara, who has to finish his statement.
Are we done with Mr. Lott? I just want to point out that I have a question.
Oh, okay. And so under those circumstances, your chair is going to have a lot of work to do to maintain the order. That's where, now I understand where you may have adopted norms before. Those norms are also important because norms in general are going to help you as a group to work together as a team. But when it comes to parliamentary procedures, you don't want to be getting into those kinds of personality issues. Okay. Ms. Control.
Well, if a board member or even the president has the floor, is it appropriate for anybody to say, well, that's enough, you've talked too much, regardless of what they're, specifically if the question is on target and has to do with getting a clear understanding so they can vote? Or is there a proper way for them to interrupt the person who hasn't yielded the floor, who waited in turn to get the floor, who was acknowledged by the board president to get the floor, and it, because somebody decides there's all of a sudden a time limit for one board member, then then they have to get interrupted because they're taking too much time.
Okay. I've got to address it this way. Time limits can be very sensitive issues. Mm-hmm. And my experience has been that not all boards, school boards, city councils, not all of them adhere strictly to their time limits. And that's what creates a problem when someone actually goes over time and no one, oh, what a fantastic kindergarten presentation and how lovely, how cute. Everyone wants to talk about puppies and babies, right? But when it comes to talking about some other subject that you don't want to hear about, then we're ready to cut you off. So what we need to have is some consistent application of those rules. Ms. Conchola, I heard you say when one board member, well, it shouldn't be just one board member who's been limited on time. And so if we are going to limit times for a board member to speak on an issue, it has to apply to all board members. And I will also be very, very blunt with you in putting it this way. Setting restrictions on the amount of time you get to speak is not always a workable way of dealing with it. Parliamentary procedures, if I can get to that eventual slide, will show you that there should be a process, right? I'll give you this example. Let's say Ms. Conchola has a motion, and let's say her motion is, her motion is that she'd like for today's meeting that members of the board limit their comments to 2 minutes each. Okay. If that is her motion, let's say Mr. Lada seconds that motion. Okay. Then the board president would afford Ms. Conchola, okay, discussion. Ms. Conchola, discuss this issue, and you have your opportunity to discuss. Anybody else? Let's say Dr. Marino has comments. Let's say Mr. Orozco has comments. Eventually Mr. Lara has comments. And after going through a first round of everyone making a comment, then the board president gets to make a comment if he or she wishes to make a comment. But after there's one round, then there can be a second round. But this time, everyone else goes before the last word is given back to Ms. Conchola. In that system, everyone had a chance to hear. Ms. Conchola had the opportunity. I have the first word, and this is why I think a 2-minute restriction is appropriate. Everyone else got heard. Everyone else is either in favor or rejects it, and it comes all the way back to her, so that, you know why? Maybe folks have reasoned with her, and she goes, oh, I value now what you've said. I withdraw my motion, right? Without having us to, vote on it again, because she might have changed her mind. But once everyone has had a turn to go around and come back, then Mr. Lada can say, I'd like to call the question, because there's already been enough discussion by everyone there.
But after she's done.
After everyone has had an opportunity, okay? Now, I have to tell you, setting those kinds of strict rules for the entire meeting, you will only have, on any one subject, 2 minutes, I think is very restrictive for you. There may be a point in time, and I do believe there's a question that's been posed that I'm working on for Mr. Galindo about board members' reports, right? Can you restrict board members' reports? Yeah, sure. I mean, as long as everyone has the same amount of time, why not? Because it's not an action. You're not taking any action. It's not an item that is of any business that needs to be handled there. but you are allowing for the board members to report. And think about it this way, nothing requires that the board members provide any report. Okay, nothing requires it. And so in some ways, think about it as your own 3 minutes of public comment, right? If the public is given an opportunity to comment on any subject, and they're given 3 minutes, it can be no different. And what I have found most board members' reports to be is, I just want to let everyone know today I went to Thomas Jefferson Elementary and I saw the ceremony that they had there. It was wonderful to see all the parents. I want to let everyone know that the rec center is going to have a celebration for the inauguration of this baseball field and so on. So it's just very limited. It's for that purpose because those board reports are not should not be used to advocate or advance or further on in business. It's an opportunity to comment on something or maybe to request that an item be placed on a future agenda so that it can be properly discussed. Okay? So allow me to move forward.
And although I want you to move forward, there's a clarification I need to hear because what you're saying is that if a board member wants to have the floor and we have not established time limits, we should go around. What happens in the case of a board member, and just to help me do my job better, a board member who has question after question, and it's almost like an interrogation, going back and forth, and I haven't finished, I have another question, I have another question, I have another question, and pretty soon the series of questions turns into 10 or 15 minutes of questioning, while the rest of the board members are sitting there entertaining her or his questions.
Okay. Sometimes that issue comes up, in my experience, with junior or less experienced board members who have just come onto the board and have not had the opportunity to review their materials in advance of board meetings, or maybe sometimes board members who are really busy and don't get a chance to review their materials. Oftentimes, those issues are limited when you have board members who review their materials in advance, are able to call the superintendent as part of the protocol to say, hey, on this item 15.1, can you explain this to me and here are some of the questions, and you get some of those questions answered independently. And then they'll say, oh, well, that's an important thing. I may ask you that question at the board meeting just for clarification to the public. So you're able to get those things done. I'm not suggesting that you use those telephone calls before the board meeting to get all of your questions answered, but to get that clarification on some of the issues where time is of constraint. Here's the other thing, is, and to assist you, maybe you decide that as a chair, it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we should be able to get our meeting done. You're not going to put any time restrictions on any board members' comments, right? You get started, an hour later, you're still in the middle of public comments. It's like, whoa, when are you going to get the business done? So once public comments are done, you may turn to your colleagues and say, we had a lot of public comments. I'm going to ask that you all be very efficient in your comments. I'm not going to, request a rule to put any time limits, but if we start getting off track by 7 o'clock, I'm going to institute a 3-minute rule. And then you kind of forewarn your board members that come 7 o'clock, if we're still trying to get business done, we're going to start putting in those time constraints so that we can get out by 9:30. That's our goal. And so there is some flexibility there to get that done. If there are that many questions, I think maybe there needs to be some work done between that board member and the superintendent ahead of the meeting to get some of those questions answered ahead of time.
And so, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Because it seems to me that sometimes board members can use the board meeting as a way to do their homework and educate themselves, and it takes time away from those of us who have read through the material and have asked questions ahead of time. And there's at times some desperation of those of us who are ready to move on, and a board member gets stuck asking question after question after question.
And it is a big job that you do, and I commend all of you for doing your public service on this board. Yeah, you do have to do some homework ahead of time. But also it's important to understand, like one of your norms, if one of your norms is listening with the intent of understanding, understand that we have a member who's trying to get information, trying to understand, to make an informed decision. Because that's what you're trying to achieve. Through these parliamentary procedures, it is to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to make an informed decision. And keep in mind, some of the questions that your colleagues may be asking are questions that members of the public have. And so the other way to look at it, and I'm going to turn here to the superintendent as well, is maybe if you start to feel that you're getting some of the same questions being asked by one or two of the board members, that helps you prepare when presenting the item. These are the kinds of questions that are going to come up, so when I present them, I'm going to hit those questions that I know are coming to make the things more efficient. But it takes preparation ahead of the meeting to make that more efficient.
So how do you prevent from one board member from, any one board member, from filibustering a meeting and, and with the purpose of being disruptive to the meeting or the process, or disruptive to the decision-making process of moving the district forward? So the question becomes one of when do you say, wait a minute, this has gone too long, or these line of questions are out of line, or now you're going off topic,
Right.
We need to come back? Like, how does that happen?
First it has to begin with your board chair, who's going to try to wrangle that person as best as possible. If that doesn't happen, and your norms that you've agreed to are not helping offset, sometimes, a one-on-one, colleague to colleague, hey, last board meeting, you took a lot of time. Is there something you can do? I can help you, to get us through that. Worst case scenario, because I hope you're not at a worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario, some of my colleagues have shared that some boards have gone to the point where they will censure a board member who is believed to be filibustering or intentionally and willfully disrupting a board meeting. And what it's turned into is that particular board will pass a resolution where it says, at this board meeting, we totaled, so many disruptions and interruptions. At this board meeting, so many interruptions and disruptions. At this board meeting, so many interruptions and disruptions, that the board now is censuring this board member. And in one case, they shared with the board member, for you and only you will be allotted a total of 45 minutes of speaking time. And so someone will monitor you for all your speaking time. And once you use up your 45 minutes, you can use it all on the first item, or you can spread it across the 20 items. But once your 45 minutes are up, you will not be allowed to speak any further. That's an extreme.
So,
Yes.
earlier I heard someone say that the perception was that it was done intentionally, that the perception was that the board member hadn't studied the agenda and was trying to do all the background right then and there. And that perception, if they're referring to me specifically, that perception isn't correct. However, there is a way to stop people from talking, and it's not interrupting. It's not with a board member signaling the president to interrupt and making hand motions, because I believe someplace, and I think it's Robert's Rules of Order, but we're not using that, that says, that's really not allowed. And so if the board president interrupts the person who already has the floor and they're asking questions, to clarify for a vote, just because they...
Motion will then be reseconded, and then may be discussed and voted on. The floor, what is the floor? The floor isn't really literally the floor, but it's the opportunity to speak and address the assembly or the group. So when you have public comments, members of the public essentially have the floor, right? When a board member speaks, that board member has the floor. And you cannot take the floor until you are acknowledged by the board president. And so if you follow parliamentary procedures, you should not be interrupting anyone, because all you need to do is to signal to the board president that you have an interest in speaking or addressing the subject, and you will be called in order. If you recall, I gave you that early example where if someone makes a motion the board president or the chair will want to give everyone an opportunity to speak. And oftentimes what I see in other districts is a representative will look at the board president and signal, and the board president nods the head, like, I've got you, John, I've got a list, I know who wants to talk, and then takes them in the order that they've signaled. In other assemblies, larger groups, larger venues, right, there is technology where a board member who wants to speak will push a button and a green light goes on a table where the chair is at. So that the chair can say, I recognize the representative from Alaska, right? Or when you've got a body that large, you can't see who wants to speak. But in smaller venues, it's just some type of system that acknowledges who's on the floor. How do you obtain the floor? And that's when a member wishes to speak, to offer a motion. To obtain the floor, they should signal the chair by usually raising the hand or whatever your custom is. And at the conclusion of any remarks that someone is already speaking. A motion, it's just the business of the board is, a motion is how the board will conduct its business. I'd like to move this project forward. I'd like to move this contract forward. I'd like to move this idea or this action forward. And that's why it's referred to as a motion. A second means that I second that. It doesn't mean I agree with it, but it means I think this motion is worthy of discussion. What oftentimes boards encounter are situations where someone's afraid of seconding a motion, or someone seconds a motion, right, in favor of something, they'll second it, but they'll vote against it. And people say, well, why'd you second it? Well, seconding doesn't mean that you need to agree with it. You just want to be done with this business, right? And the other thing is sometimes someone will make a motion, like, I don't know, I move that we give backpacks for all the kids at this second grade school. Is there a second? Dead quiet, there's no second. The motion dies for lack of a second. You can't move that item forward.
So board member can pass a motion to move the agenda forward if we're too long on a specific item without necessarily violating the First Amendment or anybody's rights. So we can say pass a motion to move the agenda.
And so I'm going to ask for some clarification. Usually at the start of the meeting, there is a motion to approve the agenda. Is that what you're referring to? Okay, so are you referring to you're on an item? Let's call it item 10. And we've been talking about item 10 for a while,
Yeah.
And you want to get past it.
Yeah, is that a motion or I move to move the agenda?
Oh,
Or
okay.
I move to go on with the agenda?
So-
without violating.
No.
anybody's
You-
rights.
Again, if what we're trying to do is get the business along,
Mhm.
right? In the middle of the discussion, okay, when a board member feels that they've heard enough discussion, they don't want to hear anymore, they may ask for acknowledgement on the floor, and they can say, I call the question.
Oh,
And by simply saying I call the question, it is signaling that you do not wish to have any further discussion, right? And by calling the question, the board president will look around and determine, I believe, no further discussion, or it puts the president on notice that maybe I should cut the discussion off, and the president at that point can say, okay, we've spent a lot of time on this, I'm going to allow us 2 more minutes for any final comments. Anyone with final comments? Hearing none, let's put this to a vote. So the way to do that is if there's been enough discussion, you can say, I call the question, and then the board president can react to that, right? And if enough people, and sometimes what will happen is there will be enough of a majority who will say, yes, call the question, and then you put that to a vote.
So, I'll move the board. So if a board member is speaking, another board member can say, call the question, but before saying that, we need to be acknowledged by the board president.
Correct.
So I cannot just speak up.
Correct.
Okay, and in doing so, violating because we're interrupting anybody.
No, if you have been acknowledged by the board president, if the board president has given you the floor,
Okay,
then you're free to speak,
all right.
right? If what I'm sensing is someone, the issue here is someone who takes the floor and doesn't yield it back, right? And doesn't yield it back. And so when that happens, you know, the comments need to be reduced to, is there a question? Not just necessarily a comment. Is there a question or a point to be made? Dr. Rion, you must be having a difficult time with your board wrangling them together, but you've got to find a way to ensure that you are listening to the points of all of your members, that they're all being given a fair and equal opportunity to speak, but not allowing someone to run away with the subject or the topic. I don't have the answers to those difficult questions. Certainly, if someone were to make a motion or a point of order that, you know, we need to set time limits, if it's in the middle of a topic, then it's hard to set time limits in the middle of a topic because some folks have already had an opportunity to speak, others have not. You have to set those before you start discussing the topic so that everyone is treated fairly on those topics. And so, Dr. Marino, the other question you asked was whether there would be a First Amendment violation. That's a constitutional law question, and quite honestly, probably not. In terms of whose First Amendment rights are you violating by interrupting in a meeting that you're 1/5 entitled to direct and participate in and move forward the business of this community? Not likely. Okay? So the question, and that's the next term. It's the question refers to what's the pending motion that we've most recently heard that we need to answer. Calling someone out of order, and maybe that's the more formal way of trying to wrangle someone back. You are out of order. If someone is violating any time limits that you've set forth, you declare them out of order. If a motion is made at an inappropriate time, they're out of order. If your discussion is in violation of norms that you all agree to, you can call them out of order for violating those norms, or any action that is in violation of any other rule or situation, you can call them out of order. Okay? A recess is just a break in a meeting. Adjournment is declaring the point in time when the meeting is being terminated. Okay? So again, these are terms that you're going to be dealing with. You should be familiar with. If you go visit other meetings, they should be very, very typical. Bottom line, when you're handling your meetings, if there's a process, always stick to form. You always open your meeting. You seem to always take public comments at the beginning of your meeting. Always take them at that point. To divert from that at some other point, now you're changing the process. You're not being consistent. If you have time limits and your time limits are 3 minutes, just because someone is talking about babies and puppies, don't give them 5 or 10 minutes. Sorry, your 3 minutes are up. Is there any objection? The board president, is there any objection to allowing this person an additional 30 seconds, maybe, to complete their final comment? No objection. You have 30 seconds, and then you need to be done. And once that person doesn't give up that spot, or give up, or yield at that point, you can declare them out of order because you've been more than generous for dealing with those issues.
So when you talk about, is there any objection, do you mean taking a vote?
What I mean, for example, I was talking about time limits.
Correct.
Right? And so, is there any objection amongst the board members to allow this speaker an additional 30 seconds beyond their time to finish their point?
So if that's the case and one board member objects?
Then if one board member objects under that, then you don't allow the additional time and we move on. Okay, you cut them off. Because the rule is cut them off at 3 minutes. Do not allow them to go out of order. Do not allow them any more time. If no one objects, then they're okay to listen to this person for another 30 seconds.
Well, and maybe this is a good time to ask you the question that I'm concerned that I have is that we have let's say, right now we have a 3-minute rule.
Uh-huh.
But there are people who don't speak English and need a translator. And I think, would it be the direction that I would like to, or what I would like to propose to the board is, could it be part of our bylaws to stop the clock when the translation is taking place? Because that person cannot get the message because of the limited 3 minutes.
It's whatever rule you as a board decide to accept. There are different ways of dealing with it. Okay? In some districts, there is a district translator and there's technology where you put on earphones and you can listen to the translation. Some boards are fortunate enough where they are bilingual, and so whether the comments come in English or Spanish, all 5 board members understand it. And so instead of, if you don't want a lot more time, maybe you have the technology where you're able to translate for members of the audience who need the earphones, and that's it. It's not delaying your meeting. But if you do need someone who has to stand at a podium and translate for the entire board, you may be losing out some time. If it's only one board member, you may have the translator sit next to that board member and interpret live, so that you're trying to be more efficient. I'm just providing you other options with it, when it comes to that.
So I think that's really important because we are a very bilingual community. We do have a lot of Spanish-speaking folks in our district that do come up and they put comments at times. I've been at board meetings, different board meetings, where they're double the time because they're Spanish-speaking, and that gives the translator time to translate and then go back and forth. And I've also seen where they've actually stopped the time when the translator's speaking and then put back on the time when the main person's speaking to make sure that person, it's an issue of like clarity and fairness, but I understand that it's not currently within our rules.
Right.
So I think we need to do something to make sure that that's specifically in our rules in order to be fair and transparent to our entire community.
And so, if you typically give 3 minutes, maybe what you do is we'll give 5 with the translation included. So it's not a full 6, but that's a decision you'll have to make at some other time.
So the only thing I would ask is that because we are a bilingual community, or not all of our members are Spanish speakers, that the board members refrain from speaking in Spanish. I totally understand that they want to welcome the Spanish-speaking audience and share with them their concerns, or they want to agree with them. However, we record our meetings, and if there isn't anyone there to translate what the board member has said in Spanish, then I have some concerns. I would like the board members who do speak in Spanish, either to each other or to members of the community at any time, that their statements be translated so that it's captured on the audio, and so that the English-only speakers can understand what the board members are saying.
Okay, well that again is something that you'll need to address with your board at an appropriate time as far as dealing with a policy that will address those issues. Typically speaking, most boards will deal with their business all in English. If you're talking about, at the start of the meeting or at the end of the meeting, they can speak to anyone any way that they choose or please to, unless you've adopted some other type of norm that will address those issues.
But how does the non-Spanish speaking audience or board member understand what's being said or agreed to or not agreed to?
Again, I'm referring to before or after the board meeting. I think
Oh,
typically
okay. All right.
the business of the board is conducted in English.
Okay, thank you.
That's a good question. Is the person who is speaking at the podium, who is bilingual, is their message to the board or is their message to the public?
Their message should be to the board. This is the board's meeting.
Got it.
You are addressing the board. It's not the public's meeting.
The reason I ask that is because if you ever had a Spanish speaker, you could have headsets ready to go. When you get a Spanish speaker, if you feel comfortable, you can put on the Spanish, you can put on the headset, she can translate in English, and now your 3 minutes is 3 minutes. So I mean, it's all up to the board. I'm just
Right.
That was the reason I was asking
Yeah.
who's it for, because then you have to translate for the whole public.
Right. No, but you would have to translate for the whole public.
Oh, so you still need to do that.
Right.
Oh, okay. So then
And
it's
so,
point.
I've seen, you know, some districts will have a cart, like, you know, your
Yeah,
laptop cart.
we have that.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
you
have
know,
that.
yeah, at school sites and
Yeah,
such, so.
so everybody needs some understanding of the.
Dear board, 6 o'clock is upon us, the hour and a half has come and passed. There's still a lot to do. Does the board have a preference on extending this another half hour or so?
We have another event to go to at the high school.
Okay.
Maybe 20 minutes?
I would ask that, regardless of what the board does, I'd like to spend another 10 minutes if that's okay with them.
With
Because
me?
yeah, because you're on the top. Because I have some questions that I would like to talk to you. You offered your services, or you said that after the meeting you would be willing to talk with us. by
No,
yourself.
at the end of my presentation, as part of the presentation, there'll be question and answer for the board.
I'm good. Ending the meeting now.
So you're making a motion?
I'd like to get to the high school.
All right, well, ladies, gentlemen, the materials, they're both written in a narrative form, and the PowerPoint tracks it. And I'm a visual kind of person, and I know sometimes visually people see it, so you'll see the PowerPoint, but I'll have some graphics like this. Feel free to review the materials on your own. If I would suggest that if you feel that, you know, some additional time is needed, let the board president know, or Mr. Galindo, and I'd be more than happy to come back and address those additional points. I want to thank you all for your time this afternoon and evening.
Thank you, Mr. O'Gean, and at this point, I will entertain the
Move to adjourn?
Second.
A discussion?
Mr. Lara,
Yes.
Ms. Canchola,
I asked for discussion, which is appropriate, based on what Mr. I just want to.
She wants to discuss whether you should adjourn now or not.
Well, actually, I don't. I want to know if I can get this just set up differently. That's all I want to know. Yes, I want to adjourn.
Dr. Marino?
Yes.
I can't read it.
Guillon,
Oh,
yes.
you want to print it differently?
Yes.